Alright guys, so we have to talk about these balance changes. Have you heard the news? I think 11 or 12 cards are being changed, and they went after the difficult cards, right? They tackled the cards that usually they don't touch. We're talking Mirror, we're talking Elixir Collector. So without further ado, let's jump into it here. I will give my thoughts as we go through, and I want to hear from you guys in the comments below. Balance changes. April season, starting with the Mirror. So the Mirror now gives +2 levels. +2 levels. They go on to say, Mirror has been a weak card forever and considered more of a situational surprise card. With this change, we hope it will make a solid change and spice things up in deck building overall. So they're hoping the Mirror finds its way into the overall meta of Clash Royale. Now part of me says, good on them. It's a card just like all the other 100+ cards in the game. Why not have it, have it stay in the sun, so to speak, right? And then part of me says, wait a second, all that Mirror does is make the most annoying, strong, OP cards even more annoying, and now we're giving 2 more levels to those cards? Yikes! But I could be wrong. I'm really going to reserve judgment. One thing I will say, although I'm kind of pessimistic to how this is going to work out, although I fear that, I do applaud the team and I'm okay overall with this change because I like when they take chances and try new things out. So this is definitely one of those. How do you feel about the Mirror now giving 2 extra levels? That's pretty major. Golden Knight. So they're going to change his range from 5 to 6. So giving him back a little bit of what they took away from this champion. They said the previous nerf was a bit too harsh, to say the least, right? Stopping his dash chain when reaching a tower will make him more predictable while bringing more tower damage value. But the King Tower activation will be harder to do. So what does this really mean? I don't know. I think that the Golden Knight is still going to be pretty lackluster when compared to the other champions in the game. I don't think this is going to be enough to make him, okay, wow, this feels like a champion, this feels like a game changer, great card. I still think he's going to be a little bit underwhelming. I think it was the reduction of his special ability, which really had the most grave impact overall on his overall power index. Next up is going to be the Giant Skeleton. Poor Giant Skeleton hasn't been able to find a place in the arena. They're going to give him a hit speed buff of 7%. That's 0 or 1/10 of a second faster. Also HP plus 7%. So hit speed plus 7%, HP plus 7%. Our goal here, this is the team speaking, our goal is to make him more viable win condition. So we added more survivability for him in hopes that he can reach the towers more easily. I will say, I don't know about a win condition, so to speak, but I do think the hit speed and the HP are not a bad thing, right? They're just going to make the big fella a little bit more viable. I'm not sure if I would have buffed him in this exact way, but then again, he's a challenging card because he is kind of a quasi-semi-win condition that doesn't target buildings. So he's a very difficult card to get full utility out of or to kind of understand exactly where his spot in the meta ought to be, even in a best-case scenario. Overall, I want to see how he does here. It's a step in the right direction for Giant Skeleton, right? Archers. This one kind of surprised me, kind of came out of nowhere. Didn't see a lot of calls out there for the Archers to get a buff. Archers now have a 9% faster hit speed. That's only 1/10 of a second, but boy, that can make a big impact as we've seen through the last 5-6 years of Clash Royale now. Archers have been underused recently, they say. They changed their bowstrings that should now compete again with other range units. So, okay, I don't know, guys. I think that Archers are going to be a super viable option now. I did not expect this buff. I think it's a pretty decent buff as well. What about you guys? I'm not necessarily complaining about it. However, I am surprised. Archers seem like a pretty well-balanced card to me. Their low use rates, to me, was more indicative or less indicative of their overall power index. More indicative cards like Musketeer, E-Wiz, Magic Archer, etc., Archer Queen, providing better range options out there inside the game. We'll see if this can bring them in line with those other cards I mentioned. Next up is another kind of an interesting one. It's Ice Spirit. Plus 30% to the freeze duration. That's 0.3 second. 30% extra freeze duration on Ice Spirit. Wow! To me, this is like low-key the biggest buff in here. I can't believe it. It's a massive buff to Ice Spirit because this is what he does. And now he does it 30% better, right? We wanted to provide more distinct use for the Ice Spirit compared to his counterparts, the Electro Spirit. And So interesting that they compare him to Electro Spirit, where I see Fire Spirit, Electro Spirit. I think all three spirits, honestly. Well, I say three. I forgot the Heal Spirit. The Heal Spirit even exists. I'm glad they didn't buff the Heal Spirit. Anyway, we say with this buff, the Ice Spirit should be able to use longer unit control, while the Electro Spirit can be for crowd control and for that shorter stun and retarget ability. So they're trying to kind of carve out more distinct niches between these cards and allow their use cases to be very obvious when compared to the other spirits. I'm okay with it. I do think that the Ice Spirit is going to be very, very powerful, probably going back to replace the Dex or Electro Spirit in the decks. The Electro Spirit came in and replaced the Ice Spirit. I like this change. It's a big one. I think it's needed though for the Ice Spirit. Balance changes to the Tombstone. So the Tombstone is seeing a nerf, a 5% slower spawn rate. 5% slower spawn rate. That is 0.2 seconds slower spawn rate. This card made a strong comeback with the last rework. Too strong, actually. We're tuning it down a bit. So this one, I still think Tombstone's going to be very strong. 0.2 seconds isn't long enough for me to impact the entire viability of the card. However, I will say this is a nerf. Like you're gonna notice it, I feel like, because as a Tombstone player myself, sometimes I play Tombstone against a bandit or a prince, and that spawn rate, especially not just the first wave, but the second and third and fourth, are just enough to totally distract a prince or a bandit the entire time. So I think this will, or P.E.K.K.A, you know? So I think this will have an impact. However, I still think Tombstone's going to be strong. Ram Rider, the Bola snare reduced, the snare power, if you will, minus to 70% instead of 85% on the slow movement speed, right? So the Ram Rider is great counterattack, but the slow effect is just too strong, making the affected units barely move, they say. This nerf should keep the effect significant while removing the feeling of rooting a card. I'm okay with this one. I'm not a Ram Rider player. I don't play a lot of Ram Rider. However, I mean, that's a distinct utility of the card that makes it what it is, right? That you can use her on the defensive end is just so powerful. However, I still think she's going to be super powerful because her knack to actually getting to the tower is really unparalleled, second to none out there. So I think the Ram Rider is still going to be a very good card. I think this is actually probably a pretty fair way to balance the card overall, if they're going to nerf it at all, which you could argue either way. Next up is going to be the Archer Queen. So the big one that we've all been waiting for, probably the strongest card in the game. Is it even close? In my opinion, it's not. Archer Queen. Hit speed boost. Change from 200% hit speed boost when you activate her ability to 180% extra. Let me repeat that. They've changed her hit speed bonus boost from 200% to 180%. Dude, that's barely a nerf, man. The Queen is still a dominant in the arena despite the previous nerfs, they say. We still think her hit points are in the right place, so her ability seems like the best candidate for a change. Now, I applaud the team. I always say this. When they go too hard with a nerf or a buff, I always say, hey, what's wrong with just going incrementally and continuing to balance the card as necessary versus just destroying and killing the card and upsetting everybody who spent their resources to max it out. But this might be that to the extreme, right? The hit speed boost from 200 to 180. I don't think it's enough to make any real impact to the Queen, you know? Maybe I'm wrong, but still 180% boost on the special ability seems pretty extreme, pretty amazing, which it ought to be. She is a champion after all. But man, oh man, this is a very, very, very tepid nerf. Next up is the Graveyard. -1 skeleton spawned. After the Giant's buff and the Mother Witch's nerf, the Graveyard has gained too much strength in the past few months. We're adjusting his power by removing Barry. Sorry, Barry. So, Barry, you're out of here, man. 1 skeleton removed from the Graveyard. Now, we've had a few pros on. I forgot who it was most recently. I think it was Jax, or maybe Juicy J, who suggested there ought to be, the issue with the graveyard isn't the number of skeletons, it's the RNG of the card, right? So you could defend perfectly and take 500 damage, and then defend perfectly and take no damage, and then defend perfectly and take 100 damage, right? There's no way to predict what the graveyard is going to do, which makes it extremely strong in the hands of any user, right? You know, when you're playing graveyard, not so much for the opponent. So the proposed solution here from the pros would be, and I love this personally, is have 3 distinct patterns that the graveyard can spawn in. I'll repeat that, 3 distinct patterns. And by where the first couple skeletons spawn, you can identify, here's exactly what I need to do to counter the card without taking any damage, or at least mitigating the damage that it does on your tower, okay? So savvy players will be able to study that graveyard and know exactly how to counter. The fact that there's multiple different patterns it can spawn in still gives that kind of RNG element to the card, which is kind of inherent to, you know, the win condition overall. So I do think that that's a good solution. We'll see if this makes an impact. One less skeleton, something tells me probably not going to make that big of an impact on the card. Still going to be a great win condition inside the arena. Next up is Valkyrie, minus 4% HP. The Valkyrie has been one of the most used mini tanks in the game for a long time. With this slight nerf, we hope that she'll be less of a jack of all trades card and leave space for her counterparts. Valkyrie, I'm not going to talk too long about this, but she does feel almost like a legendary card in terms of how good she is. I don't think this is going to do much to the Valkyrie, but I do like that they gave her a haircut on her HP overall. I think that it can, you know, step in the right direction on a card that is incredibly pervasive inside a lot of different archetypes inside the meta. Overall, just a bit too strong in my opinion. But the Mega Knight, they're nerfing the Mega Knight. So the Mega Knight's going to get 20% less spawn damage, enter the arena damage. His jumps after that, when he's jumping all over the arena, nothing changes there. Only the enter the arena ability. I want to be clear there. So despite his classy deploy jump being his main feature, it's frustrating for many players that he can destroy a whole push at the bridge and then go in for the counterattack. He is heavily used in the lower trophy range, shots fired, and not so much on top ladder. So nerfing him too much would make the card unusable. With this nerf, players will need to time their deployment, a bit more and perhaps add more support cards to counter an opponent's push. So I think this is actually a decent nerf to the Mega Knight. Minus 20% spawn damage. What can I say here? I think that they kind of nailed it. I don't know if it's going to be enough to really make a major impact on the card either way, but 20% less spawn damage, I think is a nice small nerf for the Mega Knight. They said it was a slight nerf. I tend to agree. I still think he's going to be a nuisance in mid-ladder outside the top 10,000, but overall, I think that, you know, I can't argue with that balance change. How do you guys feel about the Mega Knight? Because I know you guys have some strong opinions on the card in general. Next up is going to be the Elixir Collector. Elixir Collector, +1 elixir at destruction, duration 70 to 65 seconds, elixir generation 8.5 to 9 seconds, same 8 elixir total value, just 7 during the life and 1 upon destruction. I'll repeat that. Same 8 elixir generated over the course of its life, except for 1 you get on death now, which does change things because if I rocket a pump, for example, I'm going to get that elixir back on the death, that 1 elixir, you know, guaranteed. So I'm picking up an elixir in the exchange, you know? So the Elixir Collector is truly a unique card, but has had a low usage rate for quite a long time now, basically since they add the rule that it can't be in your starting hand. Adding 1 elixir at destruction should bring better trade-offs for spells. It will also generate the same total elixir as before. So again, with Earthquake, after they added Earthquake, that was the nail in the proverbial coffin for the Elixir Collector to me. I think this makes Elixir Collector a more enticing option in, namely, Three Musketeer in Golem decks. It'll be interesting to see if those players have success with the card again. My hunch is it actually will have an impact. I think that we will start seeing Elixir Collectors kind of re-enter those decks. All right, the last card is the Electro Giant. Man, a full rework to the Electro Giant, guys. Now it's a 7 elixir card in minus 15% HP and damage. I have some thoughts on this one, man. Reflection damage stays the same. Woo! The Electro Giant has been too punishing to play against if you are not carrying a building in your deck. He's now cheaper, but also less tanky, making him easier to counter even without buildings. He's also taking the spot of a 7 elixir tank, which was previously empty. Note, his damage nerf doesn't apply to the reflected damage, which is still the same as a zap spell every single time. And that's really what I want to hone in on here, right? I think that even at 7 elixir, to get that much damage on reflect is inherently still, makes the card still maybe even more valuable? Yeah, well, how do you guys feel about it? 15% less HP, it's going to be noticeable, right? Because the Electro Giant was already, I don't want to say easy to kill, but if you had the right cards like a mini P.E.K.K.A. or anything that was a good tank killer, you could do some serious damage to the Electro Giant even if you didn't have a building. Swarm, forget it, you were kind of screwed, right? But you're still going to be screwed with Swarm. And now I just think I err on the card being a little bit stronger. What do you guys think? 7 Elixir Giants still doing the same reflect. See, the thing is, if they tone down the reflect damage a little bit as well, I think it would be a pretty good I would think it'd be a good rework. A balanced rework is actually what I'm trying to look for here. Now I figure again, his damage that he gets from hitting things, who cares about that? So 15% of that, who cares? No one looks at the Electro Giant as like a damage dealer. They look at that reflect damage as the damage dealer, right? And then it all comes down to the HP. 15% less HP for 1 less elixir. What do you guys think? Is that trade-off worth it in your minds? I'm saying no. I'm saying he's going to be a little bit stronger. All right, guys, those are the balance changes. Thank you so much for watching all the way till the end of the video. A big shout out to Stutts, Royale, and to Bren Chong, my YouTube partners. Check out their information in the description below. Thank you for watching, and as always, take care, guys.